referred to at the time. And I guess that all came about because preservation likes to think of itself as beginning with the ladies that saved Mount Vernon, and that became sort of their the image that they were projecting.
Sure.
But then after a while, it became apparent that the real basis of the National Historic Preservation Act was about planning. It wasn't about running out and grabbing a historic building and saving it, but by adjusting the plans of government agencies, that's how preservation could be, or actually destruction could be avoided. So it was kind of a negative way. But then after a while, it became obvious that people rediscovered Main Street and historic neighborhoods and so forth, and I think it was the same disillusion with the suburbs that we're seeing right now, and the return to the urban walkable communities that we kind of merged with environmentalists and people interested in sustainability and walkable communities and so forth. So we're really kind of part of finding a broader context than we once had.
Mm-hmm.
Before it was kind of very simplistic and ended up with a lot of house museums.
So do you think that sustainability really has taken a strong position?
Every year, we do a yearly conference on historic preservation for the state of Arizona, and every year people request sessions on green and preservation and sustainability and preservation and things of that nature. So, it's been at least 5 years since we started it. That's how long I've been here. And every year the request is the same. They want more of it. But what we found is that at a national level, those guidelines like LEED standards and such aren't there for preservationists. It's only starting to come about of thinking of a building that's already built as being greener than tearing it down and putting up something that's more energy efficient. So we're still working on it.
Yeah, and is there audit information that says that if you choose to keep the building and make it energy efficient, that it actually in the long term is a benefit to, carbon offsets and greenhouse gas emissions and all the other things that it takes to actually create new materials that we use to build buildings? Are we finding that the data is there to tell people that?
Well, the trouble is that whole LEED's program is really ignored historic preservation, and when you talk about sustainability right now, it never occurred to me that it had anything to do with LEED's, because I consider the LEED's program really the genius of marketing for efficient toilets and stuff like that. And it really has nothing to do with sustainability. I mean, it's kind of tried to latch onto it, but really it's a marketing device. We had a conference of the tax reviewers, the federal income tax credit for rehabilitating historic properties, and the purpose of our meeting really was to go around in Raleigh, North Carolina, and look at rehabilitation of historic properties that also got LEED certification, and talk to the people who did it. And their conclusion was that if they had it to do over again, they wouldn't have bothered with the whole LEED thing. It cost them money and benefited them really nothing. They thought maybe it was going to help them rent apartments or rent spaces, but it didn't. And it was better and more rewarding just to get the tax credits. But LEED still doesn't really recognize anything other than new construction. It's it's uncomfortable with working with an existing building.
Mm-hmm. What about because I know LEED is moving into the whole idea of community planning and city planning and things like that. In terms of LEED, they're practicing and pulling those areas and those parameters in place right now. What do you think that's going to do as far as historic preservation? Are they considering historic preservation as part of that planning process? Do you know anything about it?
Well, no, I don't think about LEEDs, but I do know that the preservation movement has moved away from a focus on individual buildings to the larger context of districts, and also to the economic advantages of retaining and rehabilitating both the Main Street commercial areas and the residential neighborhoods. If anything, I would guess that Leeds is following the example of the historic preservation movement rather than the other way around.
Mm. Yeah, the mainstream development process has been around for quite a while now. It certainly started in the late 90s and even in the mid-90s probably in the Northeast.
One of the things that we've been doing here in pursuing the idea that there is an economic side to historic preservation as a matter of planning for what's the word I'm trying to think of, the economic development and community development.
No worries, I can edit all this stuff, so it doesn't really matter. So yeah, what were you trying to say there? Just start from the beginning.
It's historic preservation can become a strategy of economic and community development. So back in 1995, I think it was, we started to pursue that by way of developing a planning charrette to actually, I don't know, when was the first one we did? 1995 in
Winslow.
The last one we did was in Nogales. But it was based on the idea that historic preservation, taken in a larger context, can be a strategy for community planning.
Mm. Are you finding that's...
I suppose sustainability, which actually sustainability is kind of a buzzword that has probably reached the end of its effectiveness and waiting for a new word to take over for it. But I think that's what it was really all about, was the neighborhoods that kind of faded away and then they came back again, and they were sustained, I guess.
Sure.
In that sense.
Well, and I would posit that sustainability is just finding its feet, and that over the next 15 or 20 years, sustainability will basically be the thing that everyone starts to consider. Because it's an overarching concept.
We've got departments at the university that call themselves sustainability
departments, right?
Yeah, and an odd one at the Arizona State, they are tearing down a bunch of buildings in order to build their sustainability department, which I find nicely ironic.
Or at least oddly ironic. Yeah, that is really interesting that they're doing that and choosing not to expand on the current structures that exist.
Right.
Yeah.
Just waste them.
Well, it's not as glamorous as rehabilitating something isn't as glamorous as tearing it down and designing it from scratch. It's all because of architects' egos.
That's true. Maybe it's all the architects'
I don't think that's...
He's an architect. I'm not. That's why I can say that.
There was another one, too, like that in Tucson. There was a hotel, a historic hotel that had been rehabilitated to the point where it had lost all of its historic integrity. And they were going to tear it down in order to build a LEED certified hotel in its place. Well, the one thing should cancel the other one, I would think, but
right.
somehow.
Well, for me, the question always comes back to, all right, what are the resources that have already been put into place? Where do those resources come from?
Mm-hmm.
How much do they cost? What's the long-term effect of having pulled all that iron and steel and made all the concrete and done all those things to create this structure? It's kind of like that value disappears. Like there's no sense of that. And I'm wondering, from a historic preservation perspective, do you guys quantify sort of the financial implications of all the materials that go into making buildings so that people can have some idea of what it means to tear something down, beyond the fact that, yeah, this was built 50 years ago? Is there any efforts being put into that area?
Oh, well, yeah, the economics of it have been looked at, but
because it seems like a big argument that's working.
Just now when you're talking about that, reminded me that there was, I met this, I guess he was a contracting company that actually demolishes buildings, and he was demolishing shopping centers because they'd all been, kind of become useless. They weren't sustainable. But the idea was he was grinding.
Are you using my word against me?
Yeah, exactly. He was
different manner of sustainable in that case, but yeah.
No, actually. But anyhow, he was grinding up all of the concrete and pulling the rebar out and all this, and so all of this he was recycling every bit of the material of these demolished shopping centers.
Right.
And I thought that was kind of interesting, and in fact I saw it in progress at Central and Indian School, where the Indian School buildings were being torn down, and they had this giant crushing operation, and they were building great pyramids of separate different materials that were, the bricks ground up in one place and the concrete in another, and it was really something, all of this recycled material.
A colleague of ours saw a presentation recently by somebody who was claiming he was rehabbing historic homes, and one of the first things he did is tear out the historic windows and replace them. Replacement costs, he said, averaged about $90,000, and it saved $900 a year. So the math hadn't occurred to him that it took 100 years for that to actually pay itself off.
Yeah.
Where, when people call here, which they do on a near daily basis, and ask, can I remove my historic windows, we respond with, well, you can, but it's going to cost you a lot of money to do it. It'll take, depending what data set you look at, between 10 and 40 years on average to make up the cost of that. And if you really want to, you can put in a storm window, and that's going to be pretty good in energy efficiency right there, and it leaves the historic windows on the outside.
Right. Yeah, I'm a big fan of triple pane glass, and I know its efficiency is really important, but I also see that historic buildings don't generally, or lose some of its character whenever windows are removed. And do you guys address that specifically in the Preservation Society?
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Here, we don't have Jack Frost, so the double pane doesn't really do an awful lot. It's a solar load, so we suggest awnings or trees.
Right.
But you have to remember that the double pane glass was invented
in Scandinavia.
Well, it was on streetcars.
Yeah.
Because the merchants didn't like it when the streetcar went down the street and people inside, and it was cold outside, and the windows all steamed up, and the merchants didn't like it because the people in the streetcar couldn't see their shops.
Right.
And so that was why it was invented. And now it's promoted for an exaggerated energy savings. It's almost like it falls into the same category as the people who used to go around selling siding, aluminum siding. It's about like that. But now the manufacturers of windows that have found that there's a big market in replacing historic windows, so they make them look like historic windows, and it's very, very, very compatible. But they pushed it to the point now that you have to pay extra if you want a single pane window. The standard now is a double pane window.
Yeah.
So it's something of a, well, it it doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
Sure.
particularly.
Well, I'm fascinated from a preservation perspective. Let's get down to brass tacks. From a preservation perspective, what do you guys think of sustainability? What's its usefulness to the preservation department and to what preservation means?
Well, I suppose preservation and sustainable are really very quite like cousins in terms of what the concept is. If you preserve a building, and then it's going to be sustained. So, but I don't know what your definition of sustainability is.
Okay, yeah, no, sustainability has three components, right? There's the ethical, the economic, and then the environmental. Everyone thinks of sustainability as just the environmental component, but it's also community and ethical issues, labor issues, how you treat individuals in the community, how whatever you're looking to make sustainable affects the overall community, the overall way things are operating. And then from an economic perspective, what is it economically? Is it economically feasible, and does it economically have an impact that's beneficial to the community? That center part. So there are three pieces to sustainability, and that's why I think it's become kind of a catchphrase for corporations, because they're able to lump a lot of things that before they did through like cause marketing, where they would be, giving back or creating a foundation and giving money to foundations and doing things like that. And now all of a sudden they have a quantifiable effect of what they do. So if they give X amount of money into a community, this is the ultimate benefit that it comes back. So from a preservation perspective, there's all this information out there, all these tools now that kind of analyze these numbers. So I'd posit the same question that I, offered to Robert here. What do you think is the, benefit of sustainability to the whole preservation department in Arizona?
I think we're still, in many ways, still waiting to see what that is, because it's still been too focused on new construction. And while we're looking at older construction and older buildings, we're encouraging things like solar panels to be placed on. There's appropriate ways to do it, and there's less appropriate ways. And the city of Phoenix, for example, has a bigger problem with how solar panels are placed than we do. We've never once in the 5 years I've been here turned down somebody who wanted to put solar panels on their house. Solar water heaters and a lot of things can go very well with historic properties. So there's also ways to make them more energy efficient through things like insulation and as I said, storm windows on the inside of the existing windows and such. So we're very much in favor of it. In some ways, I've wondered why at a national level more people haven't been paying attention to the preservation movement, because these buildings do already exist and they are here, and there are ways that don't cost a heck of a lot of money to make them more efficient. People like Van Jones, for example, who was an advisor for Obama for a while, he's actually done quite a bit of innovative things with older buildings and that in poor neighborhoods. And his partner, forgetting her name now, Greening the Bronx was her project. That was more about building parks in the Bronx, but she's done other things as well.
So it seems like preservation really and sustainability really should be partnering with each other. As far as
I think it's probably the other way around. Sustainability as a concept, in terms of reversing decline or abandonment or disinvestment, really could be traced back to the preservation movement, as smart growth and other related movements probably came about simply because preservation was leading in that direction. So I don't know that it's a matter of, I really can't imagine preservation catching up to sustainability. I think it's the other way around. In the same way that the green and the leads is finally coming to the conclusion that maybe they ought to be looking at giving some points to rehabilitating an existing building rather than just concentrating on new construction.
Last year we had a 4-hour-long workshop on LEED standards in historic preservation. You get AIA, continuing education credits for attending, but only about a dozen people showed up for it, which was very disappointing. We expected it to be packed, and for some reason, I don't know if it was the time of year. Granted, we're in a recession, that could have had something to do with it, but I was disappointed that we didn't have a bigger turnout for it. So it tells me that out there a lot of architects and other people haven't made that connection. So we should have been well advertised at that point. They should have known it was there. This year, however, when we had a couple of sessions at our conference focusing on that particular topic, they were all very well attended, though it was from a broader audience than just architects. It was planners, it was government employees who deal with it, community development people, all sorts of people who were interested in it.